All right. Well, hello and welcome to the Liberty Weekly podcast. This is episode 87, and we are your hosts. Patrick invited us to guest host his show for him. I'm Jared with the Peaceful Treason podcast, and I'm with my co-host
Will, also Peaceful Treason.
All right.
What are the odds?
Yeah. And so for episode 87 of the Liberty Weekly podcast, while Patrick is away studying for the bar and possibly floundering, I don't know. He's
don't put that out there.
No, I mean he's that's why we're here. We're here to support him, and he's gonna knock it out of the park. We are going to talk about episode 4 of Wild Wild Country, and
maybe the wildest episode yet.
No spoilers. No, there's definitely going to be spoilers. We are also joined, of course, by you're very familiar with the Actual Anarchy Podcast, Dan and Robert, and so I'll throw it over to you, Dan. What are we going to talk about?
Hey guys, thanks for stepping in for Pat. I know that he wishes that he could be here and talk about this. He, along with my co-host Robert, who's on with us, when they first saw this series, they were like, holy crap, you've got to see Wild Wild Country. So much content, so much stuff to talk about. And we almost lucked into this opportunity with him being so busy in that we can now incorporate additional people into the discussion, right? We've had Don't Waste Your Hate, Trey Weaver of the Subversion webcast. We did episode 1 with Pat, and now we're doing an episode with you guys from Peaceful Treason. I think next week we're going to have Sherry Voluntary be the guest host, and then hopefully Pat can come back to be the top bread of that sandwich.
Yeah.
So he'll be the bottom bread and the top bread. But just a little bit about us. I know people, if you've been watching our series with Liberty Weekly at libertyweekly.net/WWC, you know that we do the Actual Anarchy Podcast, which is a film analysis show about movies from a Rothbardian and anarcho-capitalist perspective. We're also members of the Libertarian Union, which Peaceful Treason, you guys have an open invite, so do consider it.
Thank you.
No whammies, no obligations, no positive obligations here. But I'm going to pass it over to Robert. You can introduce yourself, and then we can get into number 4 with Osho.
Hey, it's me, Robert, back again for another episode of Wild Wild Country. Hopefully you're not just jumping in, but if this is your first episode, go back and listen to the first 3. Really, really good stuff. I really was excited to get into, just dig my teeth into this series because it is so full of property rights themes and culture themes and aggression. Who's attacking who? Is anyone justified at any given time? Is anyone properly defending themselves, or are they just killing people or trying to kill people? All kinds of fun stuff to dig into. And yeah, let's do it. Episode 4.
And you know, this episode is loaded with all that stuff. A lot of ethical questions. The whole episode really is dedicated to ethical questions and the awful things that the Rajneeshis are alleged to have done. This is the one. This is the climax, really.
It's really the state's case against them, right? Like it's all.
Yep.
There's even some of the interviews with the town folks where they almost even seem to acknowledge the retroactive accusations, like, oh yeah, they were up to all these things we thought they were up to when they first moved in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Robert and I, on the prior episodes, we've made the point that the Rajneeshis are responding in kind. Like, if the townspeople had never messed with them, then they would never have been a response. And the key thing for me was that the townspeople attempted to use the force of government against these people to drive them away. And so the Rajneeshis were like, okay, we're going to take the reins of government and use it against you. And then it continues to go back and forth and escalate further and further until we get to what is a bit of a crescendo in this episode, I think.
you know what? One of the greatest ironies of the entire docuseries to me is, I cannot remember which episode they quote Osho in saying, but he says that one of the reasons that he chose Oregon is because it resides within the great United States, and he believes that the U.S. Constitution is one of the greatest documents ever written for democracy. So, yes, on the one hand, the townspeople of Antelope did weaponize the political process, but Osho brought the Rajneeshis there because of the U.S. Constitution. He felt that it was their greatest opportunity to get their foot in the door into a good place of democracy, and it, well, spoiler alert, it bit him. It bit him pretty hard. So, did you guys ever pick up on that? I don't remember which episode, so I apologize. I don't think it's episode 4, but
no, that was in episode 2 where he talked about, yes, we should try the United States because of this great constitution that enshrines the separation of church and state and having a history of religious freedom and celebrating that fact. And I really thought it was fairly naive of them that they would put their faith in this constitution to protect them as a shield against people who really, really don't care about the rules. They just want what they want, and they'll use what means they have to get what they want.
Right. Yep, that's absolutely true.
I think you could boil down most of America, maybe most of the world, but I'm speaking just to most Americans are big fans of NIMBY. Not in my backyard. So they have, maybe many of them have these altruistic notions of personal sovereignty and privacy and property. But if it butts up against their personal interests, all those principles go right out the window, and they're looking for Big Brother, Uncle Sam to come right their perceived wrong.
Yeah. This particular episode also was ripe with a lot of the townspeople giving their interviews as well. And I know you guys have discussed it a little bit in previous episodes, just about the type of person that these individuals were. I guess I kind of want to ask you guys, what was your perspective of the townspeople? Were they sort of typecast as a certain breed of citizen?
Robert, you want to take that one?
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about it. It's a good question.
I mean, correct me if
there were definitely people that moved to that area or lived in that area, and they were used to a certain thing. And all of a sudden, their life kind of gets turned upside down and changed. And I guess the question is, would anybody react the same way, or were these people somehow different? And I'd like to think that if they came around to me, I'd be, perfectly fine. I wouldn't care. I mean, they are changing whatever you want to call the culture is. But I don't necessarily believe that anybody has any kind of right to any kind of permanent culture, however you can even define that word. To say that you move to a small town and therefore you're guaranteed some level of permanence, of that culture or of that size of place is fairly ridiculous. So for me, the Antelopians were way out of line. And then the level of cognitive dissonance in that they go and attack the Rajneeshis. And then they get to play the victim when the Rajneeshis fight back.
Right. Yes.
It's like they go and pick a fight, and then their victim has the gall to defend themselves, and then you get to sit back and go, oh, well, these are the violent thugs we always knew them to be.
Yeah. That's actually a perfect segue into what this episode is all about, because everything that happened to them, it seems that everything that the sannyasins, Rajneeshis, whatever you want to call them, everything that they did seemed to be a reactionary, a response to aggression toward them. And in all the interviews, you see that we were peaceful until we got pushed, and we started pushing back. And I don't think that Americans are so comfortable, and I can't speak for them, in the 70s and early 80s, but they're not used to getting pushed back like that. And it was really interesting to see how all that unfolded, and it ultimately turned into something that really marred the whole movement. Because there was an individual by the name of Sheila who took it to the extreme. So this episode kind of starts out, and it seems like it's all over the place. They start talking about the poisoning at the Dalles, and I actually looked this up. I don't know if you have dived into it too much, but the Dalles is actually like an hour and a half drive from the Antelope, and Antelope is another 18 miles, so another 25 minute drive from the ranch. So the Dalles is really nowhere even near the ranch, and
that's still the same county.
It's all the same county.
It's a huge county.
It's really big, yeah. But it brings some context into it, because everyone thinks that the Rajneeshis took over this region. Well, no, they were trying to be disconnected from it, until they started getting forced into the political process, in which they had to start essentially gerrymandering the county. That's what they were using Antelope to do, and that's when they got pushed back from Antelope. So it's really interesting how the whole thing happened. If they had been left alone, it would have never escalated to this point. So this episode starts out, of course, kind of just explaining all the little details of that, going from the poisoning at the Dalles. They start foreshadowing Sheila's underground quarters. That'll be discussed. You guys are going to talk about that in episodes 5, I think. It starts foreshadowing this, and then the Hollywood people start moving in, and that's where I think you could extract a little bit of conspiracy theory, because the doctor comes from that group, that comes from the Hollywood group, where the Bhagwan requests a new corporation to be set up, and that corporation included the doctor, whose name was Devaraj, and Devaraj, Sheila alleges that he started getting the Bhagwan on medication. So all of a sudden there are these outside influences. There's some paranoia from Sheila, and this ultimately becomes the first target of the murders that are discussed in episode 4.
Yeah, we tend to lead towards the conspiratorial side. That's where we lean. Dan and Robert, you guys think that there was anyone on the inside, or any of these attacks may have been
infiltration? Yeah,
some sort of false flag or some other nefarious third party.
Some kind of COINTELPRO situation.
Yeah.
That never once occurred to me, but now that you say it, it's interesting to play around with.
Yeah.
I'm of the camp that believes that Sheila made a whole bunch of mistakes, and she sure could have, especially when she goes to kill the doctor. I thought that, why didn't she have a conversation with Osho?
Yeah.
And find out what his intentions were and that sort of thing. I thought that she was quick to, use violence as a way to solve her problems, although not necessarily against the state. I thought her use of violence against the state was fairly much, we're out of options, and it's either fight back against these violent thugs in the way that they started. I mean, this all comes down to statists not understanding the nature of the state.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to use violence, but they don't recognize it as violence. They call it democracy.
Right.
They call it, this is just the way things work. But the Rajneeshis saw it as violence. We're being actually attacked. We are being threatened. We're being coerced. They're threatening to destroy our city.
Yes.
So to really say that, using actual attacks in defense, I'm a little more sympathetic to their cause.
That's fascinating to me.
Now, I'm wondering where you guys are on the whole Sheila question, because she is really the polarizing figure in this series. Some people are very pro-Sheila and very few, and I'd say more are anti-Sheila, but I think she's a very complex figure, and I thought she came off pretty well in the interviews.
I agree, actually. I liked Sheila initially. I think she would have made an amazing politician. Her biggest downfall was that she made some really damaging miscalculations. And what's interesting is I think that when the dynamic between her and Osho's, that relationship seems, there's something that the docuseries doesn't cover, right? There's something that happened between the two of them, and of course Osho denies that there was ever any romantic relationship there, and maybe that was part of the problem. Is maybe Sheila had some anxiety because of that, because she admits that she was in love with Osho, and so I think that the relationship became a very the dynamic was just damaging, because they were she was trying to be the secretary, he was the leader, and she was trying to protect him while there was this tension between the two of them. And I think that answers your question as to why didn't they have a conversation? Well, she thought that he had been co-opted, I think that she was paranoid. I believe that she in her mind, Osho was co-opted, and she felt like she had to go rogue, which she obviously did, and to protect Osho. And so I think she was acting in the best interest of the group, but ultimately it wasn't, because it was such a dramatic miscalculation. What do you think?
Their biggest miscalculation was the amount of poison to put in the doctor. Because they failed in that.
They really did. I mean, they didn't succeed one time, right?
Well, how do you look that? There was no Google then. How did they even look that up?
Well, they had their own lab.
They had their own lab.
I guess so. Yeah.
Allegedly, they had their own lab. I don't think the docuseries ever showed it, or that was never really clear to me. There's a lot of allegations, and that was one thing that I didn't like about the docuseries is, okay, you have all these townspeople whimsically throwing out these things that they remember, or it didn't seem like there were enough court documents that said, okay, was this ever brought to court? Was this ever proved, disproved? There was just so much, what's the word?
Hearsay?
There was so much hearsay, yeah.
Right. On the Rajneesh side, you have a lot of video footage from the time. And on the townfolk side, other than some local news broadcasts, you have people, elderly people essentially recollecting what they considered facts 30 years prior. It seems like the Rajneesh had a much more accurate burden of evidence.
No kidding. And in this very episode, Swami Prem, he was the lawyer who's been,
He's the what?
Consistent. The lawyer. Lawyer? Don't make fun of me. He's been very prevalent all throughout the series. And he said in this episode 4, they had a team of 25 lawyers with 20 paralegals, I believe were the numbers, which is an amazing team. If there ever is to be an Ancapistan, we need to learn that lesson. You're going to have a gigantic legal team. So that's where we need to start. But you're right. The burden of proof was really on the state, because there's a lot of hearsay on their side and a lot of legal documentation on the side of the Rajneeshis. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, I wanted to take us back to early on. We talked about how the Rajneeshis were wielding the state in defense of the state being used being weaponized against them.
Right.
And how the Constitution was something they were looking up to protect them. Mm-hmm. And that's why they chose that location. Well, the Dalles, the poisoning there was a trial balloon, because they were gerrymandering. They were bussing in all these homeless people and having them be residents for 30 days, which was the rule, and then bringing them down to the Dalles, which was, you said, 150 miles away or whatever, by bus, and going to the courthouse to try to register to vote. And the state decides on a whim to change the rules on them.
Yep.
And that's what drove them to do okay, well, if they're not going to let us vote by their rules, then we're going to get people sick enough so that they can't vote against us.
Yep.
And so that's where that kind of crazy scheme came into play. But it was because the rules got changed on them in the favor of the state.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it just goes to show you, and I draw this parallel to the yearning for freedom, we talked about in the pre-show, the Libertarian Party and using political action to try to achieve our ends. And I don't agree with begging our masters, because even if you technically, follow it by the book and win, they'll screw you.
Yeah.
They'll change the rules on you. It happened to Ron Paul. He was supposed to be up. Was it a debate issue? I forget exactly what it was, but there was something going on that he had qualified for something, and then they changed the rules on him at the last minute. Do you guys recall that at all?
Yes, because we were a part of that.
Yeah, we witnessed it firsthand.
It was the National Convention in 2012, and there were two controversies that were kind of simultaneously going on. There was Ohio, which they changed the rules on him in Ohio, I believe, because he was actually on track to win both Missouri and Ohio, which would have done something. I don't quite remember, but we were directly involved. We were going to be delegates, and then one thing that I remember is they asked him to concede, even though he had won enough votes to be considered at the RNC, and he refused. So what they were going to do is say, we'll give you a free some free stage time if you'll go ahead and concede. And he didn't, because he knew that they had changed the rules to basically force him out. And they did this literally in the summer leading up to it. This wasn't like this wasn't before the campaigning started. This was when he had the most momentum of any libertarian candidate in the history of, in the last several decades. Third party. And they did it just months before the Republican National Convention. I don't remember specifically what the rule was, but they did numerous things in different states, and it was all to kill the momentum that he was getting throughout that summer. So, to your point, though, I think that the state is inherently violence. Violence is what backs everything that the state does. So if you think about taxation, people forget that taxation is a violent act because they don't actually see people being taken to jail when they don't pay their taxes. I think that's because people don't even know how to not pay their taxes. And even if they could, the state would be very, very hush about that. But ultimately, kidnapping and ultimately death, if you refuse to be kidnapped, is what backs taxation. And so at the very core of what the state is violence. And so it's no surprise that when state force, however it is presented, is met to a group like this, that the pushback would end up being poisoning and stabbing with needles and all this other stuff. It's
Splendid beaver.
It's exactly right. So I'm not surprised.
No, I'm not either. I think Sheila, they're very kind of, she's a fighter, and she's a bit of a gangster, and you mess with her and she'll fight you. Mm-hmm. She'll take it to you, and however you want to play it, she'll play it.
Right.
And they changed the rules on her at the last minute when she was going to have everybody vote. And so they took that away from her. Well, what do you expect her to do? Just lay down and die? No, she's not going to do that. No. She's a pit bull, man.
Yeah. And I think you have to give her some credit for that, too. I think that a lot of the things that she did were noble.
It was a great plan, great idea. I wouldn't have thought of that.
No. Well, you might have if you were in that situation.
Maybe.
Once they're in that situation, they know the rules, they know the stakes, and they know exactly how many votes they needed. The population of the Dalles at that time was just under 11,000. And as we know, the ranch, the most people that they ever had at the height of their success was just right at 10,000. So they knew that they were going to be really, really slicing votes. And So, and the Dalles was the most populous, obviously, the biggest population center within the county, Wasco County. And so that was the battlegrounds, essentially, despite the fact that it was an hour and 20-minute drive away. That's why the Dalles became so critical. And, of course, when they changed the rules, that's when they started fighting back. And then that's why they also dropped the homeless off in the Dalles, whenever the homeless started fighting back. Whatever the homeless were doing, they were acting the fool.
Yeah, and I didn't realize, I guess, how small and rural it was, because, on first-time viewing, when they talk about, dropping salmonella at salad bar, whatever, they're like, okay, so one restaurant, what's that going to do? But you and I do know rural towns, there's like one eating hole, one eating spot. You can hit 10%, 20% of the most populous town in this region in one weekend. Like, it's actually a very high value site if that's what you're trying to accomplish.
It's an interesting strategy, to say the least. Dan, what else do you have on that? What do you think about the state being inherently violent? Are you surprised that they pushed back in these violent ways?
Well, I'm going to agree with you that taxation is violence, and all government laws are backed up by a gun.
Right.
And I guess by extension, we could say that the currency is backed by violence.
100%.
So, yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you that even if you play by their rules, if they don't like the outcome, they're going to change the rules on you, like we've discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me of how, it's supposedly three branches of government checking each other, and it's always the government deciding whether the government was justified in doing what the government wanted to do, So, of course, they're going to get off scot-free with this whole thing. And so I do have to admire the sannyasins in being willing to fight back. Now, I think that they did take it out on innocent parties, the, potential voting public, who... So I got to think that they didn't realize that what they were doing was a violent act. Though, to Robert's point, the sannyasins certainly saw it as an imminent threat to their way of life and to their, little home society there. Though I don't think that they saw it as the threat of imminent death.
You mean the people in the Dalles?
I mean the sannyasins.
Yeah,
like they just were probably in the position of realizing that if they didn't win, that they were going to have to leave at some point. Right.
Yeah. They didn't have fear of life like, a police officer walking by a 12-year-old with their hands empty, and they fear for their life constantly.
Yeah.
They just would have they would have been inconvenienced. But, when we talk about the state being pure violence, I think it's important that all the characters acting within the state don't actually have to have malicious intent, but because it is built on violence, that's gonna happen naturally all the time via the ballot or the police or the National Guard. It's the only response it knows. It's a base animal plant instinct of just it's gonna lash out. So you can have it goes back. It doesn't matter the intentions. You could vote the best people in there, and their solution to the problem is going to be violence virtually every time.
That's the biggest, most useful tool in their toolbox.
Yeah,
though.
it's just one Thor hammer in the toolbox. That's all it is.
I was going to say,
the only people that can pick it up are the special people that got their names written down on a bunch of pieces of paper with broken promises.
I was going to say the only tool in the toolbox.
It's not them doing it; they're just enforcing those laws.
Right.
There's like that one guy in this episode. He's like, they tried to poison me for doing my job.
Yeah.
Like, well, what if your job is state executioner or for nonviolent crimes? Yes, people are going to come at you for doing your job.
So
in the very beginning of the episode, there's this county inspector guy, who is traveling to the ranch, and he said that there were every visit to the ranch was never very pleasant. And it just reminded me of the Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago, when, he kind of lamented that all these people were taken away to the gulags, and they wondered aloud to themselves, what if when they came for us, what if those people who came for us just disappeared, didn't come back? how many of us would be here? And, these government agents, I wonder, how, if we just didn't treat them as if they were regular people or the gods that, the cops get treated as. If they got treated with, discontent and malice, maybe not open malice, but pure resentment and, open hostility, like these sannyasins treated these people who were, in my mind, attacking them with violence or threats of violence.
Yes.
We often give, government agents a pass because they're just regular people and they're just doing their jobs and they don't necessarily know any better. But like your point, what if his job is assassin or executioner? Does he know then?
Right.
What if his job is police officer? Does he know then? What if his job is county inspector? Does he know then? I mean, at some point, you got to treat people like adults.
Yeah.
And responsible for their own actions.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's why I'm on the side of abstain from the political process altogether. And that kind of ties back into this conversation that's been ongoing about the Libertarian Party. Tom Woods and Dave Smith and Mance Rayder and all them jumping on board. It's been a topic of discussion within the Libertarian arena. And I'm on the side of, look, by participating in that, you're sort of diluting the power that we really have by saying by drawing that line and saying, no, you're on the side of violence and we're not. And by jumping into that political process, you're essentially saying, well, we're going to play your game and try to beat you at it. Well, if you're not willing to be violent, then you're not playing their game. So I guess before we jump, we have to talk about Turner. But before we do that, I just want to pose the question, because we talked about in the bonus content, which you can get by subscribing to Liberty Weekly's Patreon. There'll be links in the show notes page, and so you can go listen to our probably a 45-minute conversation before we went on to this conversation, and we talked about the importance of nonviolence in our own lives, and I often have thought in this docuseries about what might have happened if they had committed to a strategy of nonviolence. What if they had never got the guns? What if they had never poisoned anyone? Would they have been able to develop a strategy that would have been equally, if not more, successful in their mission, which was to gain not only support, but a larger community within Oregon? What do you guys think? Is there a path of strategy? And the bigger question is, if we're ever going to do Ancapistan, if Ancapistan is ever to exist, we're probably going to have to figure out what that strategy is.
Oh,
yeah, that's an interesting question. It makes me think of Sheila and her media tour. And
it was very bombastic.
She was such a fighter, and she was bombastic, and she was very aggressive and combative and argumentative. She wasn't going to back down from anybody. But if she had perhaps played the more Dalai Lama-like pose, and, we're peaceful protester type people, we're trying to protest this kind of aggression, and we're just peaceful people who want to live peacefully, and please leave us alone, then she might have garnered more public sympathy, as opposed to the kind of, I don't know, passive dismissal or aggressiveness. I mean, it seemed like everybody was kind of combative with her on these shows.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how much sympathy they garnered from, the population en masse.
Apparently none from historians and people that write textbooks, because I'd never heard of anything about this group, about this movement. It was a few years after, but I lived in the Northwest as a kid. I majored in religious studies, where I thought I studied every religion, sect, and cult in my 4 years. Apparently not, because I'd never seen any reference to the Rajneeshis ever until this docuseries.
I think there was very little favor in what you would call mainstream media back then. And he's, you're right, Robert, that the media in the interviews in the docuseries, it was always very, very conflicted, and you could sense the tension. Some of that, I think, was probably initiated by Sheila, and you could see that in the gal that's also in this episode. Her name is Jane. I forget her Rajneeshi name or her sannyasin name, but she was the one who ended up being the one who did the needle, and she became a disciple of Sheila almost. And there was a couple of times when she got behind the mic and she became bombastic and she said, "I'm going for it." And she's the one that said, "We're going to infect Wasco County. We're going to infect Oregon, and we're going to infect the whole world with laughter." And, that's how she ended it, with laughter and happiness and everything. But she came across as just like, we're going to push this down your throat, whether you like it or not. And she got that directly from Sheila. So, I think that Sheila was the center of that, because if you look at the Bhagwan Osho, he was there. That didn't really permeate in his persona at any point through the docuseries, as far as I knew. So I think that whole side of things that came from Sheila. Dan?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I think she hived off into Sheila's orbit as Sheila was getting more and more estranged from Osho because the Hollywood folks were doping him up, and she probably needed to have some confidants, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I looking back at the interviews and seeing Sheila be so fiery, I have a certain pride in seeing her do that. But I think you're probably right that had she taken a different tact, it might have played better to the audience. We just did an episode on the Hunger Games, and in the first movie, how they got two of the tributes to survive was to sell the narrative that they were in love with each other. With, eating the poison berries, doing the Romeo and Juliet thing. Huh. And it's like you have to win the crowd, right?
Yeah.
Our next episode's Gladiator, so I'm pulling all these things together. But, had Sheila been a bit more of a Ron Paul type, like we talked about him earlier, he was a great conveyor of the message. Not the best public speaker, but the message was pure and very well received. And I think that perhaps things would have played out a little bit differently. Now, I think that it was, 35 years ago. So the amount of media and how you can broadcast your information is far more different now. Because you're right, we have never heard of this until this documentary came out. But I'm just wondering if it's just a matter of using this new Gutenberg press to take the lessons of the sannyasins in our quest for an Ankapistani type society.
And that's exactly what were we going to say, Robert?
Just have maybe not so many lawyers, although lawyers would be great, but have an equally good PR department.
Hey, we're gonna have Liberty Weekly host on our side, and he's gonna be passing the bar exam. So we're gonna have at least one.
Patrick can just do all the work. He can do the work of 20 lawyers.
He'll have a couple paralegals. It'll be Patrick, and then just a couple paralegals, and Capistan will be good.
So Swami McFarlane.
Yeah. So we have to hit U.S. Attorney General Charles Turner, who is very central. How are we doing on time? Are we got to be getting close to 45 minutes to an hour?
We're about 40 minutes in, so
okay,
we'll probably got another 10 or 15 minutes.
Perfect. What I want to do, if this works, and I hope it does, I saved a couple clips from this episode, and there's nothing really that wraps up I think at least explains the hatred that the sannyasins had for U.S. Attorney Charles Turner more than this clip. So I'm going to play a clip from episode 4. Hopefully it'll play.
These people were basically amoral people who could not or would not conform to the laws of our society. But anytime you find people that are unwilling or unable to conform to the mores of society, you find a person who is a potential criminal.
You guys hear that quote okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
What did you think? That was the next target of the sannyasins. The attorney Turner, and that was when I watched it the very first time. The whole series, that snippet stuck out to me more than anything else because is it heavy? What he's really saying there.
Yeah, I mean, everything. I had a real hard time listening to any one of these, the attorneys and how they were talking about how they were doing God's work and, how righteous they were and how they were just vilifying these wicked and evil and horrible people that just wanted to hug and laugh and have sex. I mean,
right.
It was, it was really kind of gross. Especially the way they, ex post facto talk about how evil they were. And really, they're just saying that, these people didn't want to conform to the norms, the cultural norms, and therefore they're criminals, essentially. But really, we're all criminals. I mean, the more laws you have, the more criminals you create. Right. And really, it's just them finding an excuse to get rid of somebody they don't want. And you could do that with anybody. We're all breaking the law almost all the time.
Yes.
And if you get on somebody's bad side, who is one of these thugs in a position of quote unquote authority, you're in trouble.
We probably broke a law playing that clip.
Yeah, probably did. The one thing that I found interesting from that clip is he fuses the ideas of law and culture together, and he said anyone who can't conform to the mores of society, right after saying something about laws and not abiding according to laws. And I just found that really interesting. It was like, on the one hand, you've got laws, and I think he probably thought in his mind, well, they're not really breaking any laws. Well, I've got to throw in this, they're not conforming to our cultural norms, and so they're a potential criminal. There's no wonder that the sannyasins felt oppressed by this man. And of course, he was the one that was going hard after them after they... So there's something else that happens in the episode. Help me remember, Dan or Robert, that forced this. So essentially they were... this is where the immigration thing came in, and Turner came in to shut them down and charge them with the immigration charges.
Well, there was the whole request to become a religious worker status.
Right. Okay, so that's the victory that they ended up winning.
That they ultimately ended up winning, but they were rejected, I think, 2 or 3 times beforehand when it was ridiculous. But, they said, well, he doesn't talk. He doesn't participate in the religious ceremonies recently, so therefore he's not a religious worker, which is... I loved the rebuttal of the Swami.
Yes.
It was like, so if the Pope gets laryngitis, then he's not the Pope anymore?
Yes, it was brilliant. And it was just on a whim. It was almost like he had it, ready to go. No. But that's exactly, he made a brilliant point. It's like, you don't just stop becoming a religious influence because you take a vow of silence, which Bhagwan was at this point. He was on a 3-year silence pledge. And so this was really interesting because they came back and they won this ultimately. They fought and they fought and they fought. And this is the point where they came in and said, we had a huge law team on this, and they fought and they finally won. They got him to change his status so Bhagwan was going to be able to stay. At this point, they had to change their tactic, and that's when Charles Turner came in with another gentleman in the show. I can't remember his name, but it was a 2-man team, and they said they spent every time on the clock, basically, for 2 years. It was him and Turner basically trying to take down Bhagwan and the Rajneeshis, which is an amazing waste of our tax dollars, right? This is the federal level, and what a waste of our quote, our collective resources.
Yeah, and it really smacks to them just being desperate to get rid of the guy. It's like, well, okay, we can't kick him out because he doesn't have religious worker status, so now we're just going to dig around and dig and dig and dig and come up with some other reason
Yeah.
And so then they come up with this immigration fraud and this marriage fraud where they would, send people to places to get married or live essentially, and then get married and then come back. And, on Campistan, of course, this would never be an issue. Nobody would care.
No one would give it.
But in the United States, they got to come up with some reason to get you.
And what's amazing is when he was describing that, he was like, oh, what they would do is they would do this, blah, 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 blah. And he laid out everything that they did. And I was like, that seems perfectly fine. And in fact, it seems legal. Like, I don't even know what you're complaining about. Are you complaining about the fact that they're going back and then having lots of sex? Like, they are voluntarily in a polyamorous relationship? Like, so are you just angry that they're swingers, or is there some law that they're actually breaking here? I couldn't put that together, but he's like, oh, this is the greatest immigration fraud ever.
It's for the children. They're going to corrupt the youth.
I could not find anything in what he said that was actually legally, a breaking of the law. I don't know.
And then in further efforts to demonize them, there's this reporter guy who gets a fair amount of screen time in this episode.
Yes.
And he went and dug into their issues in India.
The financial stuff.
And he said that the sannyasins were accused of immigration fraud, smuggling gold and currency.
Right.
Ooh.
Oh, you don't smuggle
Keeping
gold.
your own gold and your own currency. And tax issues.
It was the early 80s. They were off the gold standard.
These are just horrific criminals, of course.
Yeah.
They brought their wealth over to America to enrich everyone around them. How dare they?
Just the worst people.
Set up new global markets of trade. The worst.
And not give the U.S. their cut.
Right.
They probably would have been willing to work out that deal. Whatever the
right.
Would have been set aside probably the 501c3 side for religious things, and then maybe have to set up some sort of other type of maybe for-profit side, and they'd fudge the numbers. They'd pay the minimum.
I think they did some fudging of numbers, and I mean,
good for them.
Good for them. Good for them.
Yeah, absolutely good for them. Now, what did you guys think of the dumping of the homeless people on the surrounding populations? In the show, it's kind of played up as if the Rajneeshis have some kind of obligation to take care of these people, or at least to put them back where they came from, I suppose. But it seems as if they were kind of like feeling the native Oregonians felt nonplussed that these homeless people were being dumped on their streets.
I have a clip from one of the homeless people, and you tell me what you think about this.
Tell me it's the crazy white-eyed guy.
Well, I just want to check it out. And the guy that works better, he looks like a damn devil.
What would you tell another young person?
Not to come, unless you want to be queer. Because there are all kind of queers and everything, because I've seen it myself that they're kissing and hugging. And the lesbians too.
Now, it seems to me that this gentleman does not buy into the sannyasin way. So if you're talking about a voluntary arrangement, he obviously does not understand the Bhagwan. He's calling them queers, and he thinks he looks like a devil. This guy was obviously brought in as a strategy, and I can't speak for whatever the agreement was before that, because that would be critical, right? Like if the agreement is you're going to come in, we're going to feed you for a couple of weeks, and then we're going to relocate you, they wouldn't have a lot to complain about. Now, if they got there and they liked it, and they wanted to stay, but they didn't buy into the culture, or they didn't agree to whatever
chores.
They weren't pulling their weight. I mean, it was a socialist type environment. There would have to be some kind of mutual agreement beforehand. So that could have been a miscalculation by Sheila and her cohorts in not really laying out the terms of whatever that agreement was. Now, as far as dumping them back in the Dalles, I believe that was just a strategy. I think that was them getting back at the Dalles for beating them in the elections, because that happened after the fact. So
they definitely did adopt a lot of state tactics.
Yes, absolutely.
So before they kicked started relocating a lot of the homeless. They started like drumming up charges. Oh, well, there was a fight somewhere, so these people have to leave. And really, there was just a quota of people that they were trying to bus away, and they were making up charges, kind of like the local law enforcement making up charges to drive them away. Like they very quickly became American in all the worst ways.
Yeah. What do you guys think?
Well, I think Robert's relocating or something. I hear a lot of shuffling of feet and doors closing.
Hopefully that wasn't the SWAT team busting in.
Yeah, hopefully not. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that this is an interesting question because they were dropped back into the Dalles, and it could have been retribution, or it could have been that they were now no longer needed. They were disposable, right?
Yeah.
Like they were brought in explicitly for this vote, but the cover story, the rhetoric was, oh, we're a welcoming people, and we're going to give them a chance at love and life that they haven't had. Other people have given up on them. So we're going to bring them with open arms, and they can come and be a part of our society. But to your point, it's a pretty shallow veneer for what was really going on. They were trying to swell their numbers, get them there for the 30 days to be able to vote. I don't know if they had a plan beyond that. Honestly, it didn't seem like they did.
I think it's hard to make a judgment. I think we would have to know what the agreement was beforehand, because surely they had an agreement, right?
Not with each individual derelict.
It could have just been a cookie cutter form. I mean, who knows?
Probably just a hot plate and beer was all that was promised,
and a bus ticket.
I mean,
that's how they made it sound, right?
That's what I'm guessing. But again, I think that's probably speculation. If you were doing it if someone was doing it in Ancapistan and we were actually developing a strategy, I think you would want to have it all laid out. This is what the plan is, and these are the terms that you're agreeing to. And if you don't agree to them, we're going to dump you back in the Dalles. I mean, I think if you want to talk about voluntarism, there has to be mutual agreement, regardless of whether it's a homeless person or the leader of a cult. So,
yeah, I mean, when I first saw this part where they were bringing in the homeless people, I immediately thought this is a bad plan.
It really, there's no question that it was a bad plan. Now, if their plan had been to sort of rehabilitate people and really help people, in some cases they probably were successful in that, but obviously not in all cases. They were looking for numbers.
Right. Yeah, and then I also wonder, what was the capacity of some of the people coming to be able to enter into a voluntary arrangement?
Sure. Well, that brings up a whole podcast episode in and of itself.
Yeah, I've been wanting to touch on that. Yeah.
We're just now out of time, but I do want to broach the subject a little bit of. To my mind, it sort of is their responsibility, especially if the homeless people who've come along haven't really the capacity to make the decision or the make the agreement. It's almost like. The scenario of, you invite someone up into an airplane and then you drop them off halfway, like still up in the sky.
Yeah.
So you've taken them across the country. You've said, hey, we're going to take care of you. We're going to feed you. We're going to drug your beer so that you're more compliant. And then once this vote happens, you're on your own. I kind of think that the sannyasins sort of have a bit of a responsibility to take care of these people because they took them from where they were. And you're right, it does. We don't know all the particulars of the agreement or whether the people could actually agree, really, if they had the mental capacity, because I'm sure a lot of them had mental illness or drug problems and addictions and things like that. But I honestly don't think they were looking at it beyond, let's swell our numbers, get them here for 30 days, try to win this vote thing, and then deal with the consequences.
Yeah.
That's a strategy we've seen come up lately, it seems.
And I think Sheila actually, A, she bit off more than she could chew, but also B, she responded really. It was a knee-jerk reaction because what ultimately happened was one of the homeless people attacked her, grabbed her by the throat. Do you remember that part? I don't remember if that was discussed in episode 4 or maybe earlier, but that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back when it came to the homeless people. So. She called the meeting and was like, we're not going to tolerate this anymore, basically. If you act up, it's one strike and you're out. So I think it was a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction. I think their intentions may have been good initially, and it caught up to them. So you say we're out of time, Robert? Or
yeah,
Dan,
unfortunately.
Okay. I don't remember. I don't hear which one of you said that, but let's wrap up. Do I have 2 minutes to play the final clip of the Bhagwan, or do we want to just kind of to close up right now?
I think if you got a clip and we could give a little more juice to this episode, I say we do it.
Okay, so here's I'll just kind of wrap it up quickly. Basically, what happened was in this episode, they sort of outline how these assassinations took place on the doctor, on Turner, and then of course on the people in the Dalles. They consider that to be an assassination attempt as well. The wiretapping within the compound comes up. Another critical thing that happens is the suicide, the planned suicide, allegedly that the doctor was planning that. So that was the reason that they were going to kill the doctor, is because the doctor allegedly had planned a planned suicide with the Bhagwan. So Jane and Sheila freak out, of course. It all kind of stops when they actually attempted the murder of the doctor. So this takes place, and this is essentially when, in the exact language of their lawyer, Swami Prenurine, he says, "Shit hit the fan." And so the very next day, Sheila and Jane was the one who actually stuck the needle in the doctor, tried to kill him. They leave on a plane, and then all of this apparently becomes a revelation to the Bhagwan. And the Bhagwan broke his silence the very next day. So Sheila gets on a plane, takes Jane with her, and he makes his first this was a press conference. It was a large gathering, and so he spoke. This is what he said.
I have been silent for 3.5 years. The people who were in power took advantage of my silence. Sheila and her group, they tried to kill 3 people. They have attempted to murder people in the commune. They have attempted to murder people in Dalles. They have attempted bugging people's houses, my own house. These people are absolutely criminals. Inhuman, brutal, fascist in their outlook. She should have been here and faced me. She did not even come to say goodbye to me. People who don't commit crime don't escape like that. How long you can hide? And if the police is not going to take the action, then my people will take the action.
So then, that's how that episode ends. Pretty intense.
Yeah, great.
Goosebumps.
Yeah, goosebumps for sure. And the question I have at the end of this episode is, well, do you believe him? You know, because he seems to be he's claiming that he is completely separate from all of this. And, well, if you haven't watched the show already, you need to. We've obviously given out a lot of spoilers, but Actual Anarchy is going to be at it again next week for episodes 5, and then the week after for episode 6. And that's about as well as you can wrap up a show, I think, and prepare for the next one. Anything you guys want to say to prepare people for next week's episode? Oh,
you guys.
Sorry, I had you muted. Can you say that again?
Certainly, yeah. I just want to say that it's been a lot of fun being on here with you guys, and
Absolutely.
with that ending and some of your lead into that, it made me have one of those moments of, I wish we talked about this and this and this, and this could easily have gone to be a 2 or 3 hour episode.
Oh yeah.
The voluntary choice of the Bhagwan wanting to commit suicide, and then Sheila overreacting to that. She's interfering with his voluntary decision here.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Oregon is where Dr. Jack Kevorkian was from. That became a big issue back a few years after this, the assisted suicide law and all that. So we have tons more to talk about.
Yeah.
But no time tonight, unless maybe a little bit of bonus content for the Patreon supporters of Liberty Weekly.
Possibly.
You guys, I know you got to get to bed, but we've got a little bit more juice. But yeah, episode 5 should be a lot of fun. It does. I think that this episode 4 was probably the biggest build up, and then this ending is like the crescendo.
Yeah.
And then you start to see the fallout.
Yeah.
5 and 6, and it's just a great story to take a lot of lessons from, and a lot of meaty, juicy bits to sink our teeth into for discussion.
Yeah. So for me, this was as emotional as I've ever gotten within a documentary, for sure. Episodes 5 and 6, I definitely got more emotional because I think I'm like Robert. I think I empathize with the Rajneeshis and sannyasins a lot more than the average person for a lot of reasons discussed in this episode. And if you're out there listening to this series up until now and you haven't watched the whole docuseries, I highly recommend listening or watching the docuseries in its full before you get to episodes 5 and 6. And you guys, Actual Anarchy guys, are going to do great. I can't wait to listen to those 2 episodes as well. And honestly, it's been an honor to be on with you guys. And thank you, Patrick, at Liberty Weekly so much for letting us come on and guest host this for you. Anytime, guys. We'd love to do it again.
Yeah, it was big shoes to fill, and I had a great time.
Yeah, for sure. So,
well, you guys were fantastic, and it was a lot of fun for me too. Stick with us next time. We'll have Sherry Voluntary, who actually spent, what is it, Daniel, like a couple decades in a self-described cult. So that should be really interesting for that perspective from her.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. And I think that I'm enjoying this concept, and I want to apply it more. I kind of want to have Actual Anarchy be the rotating guests on other people's shows, and we'll just knock out series like this.
That's a cool idea.
Awesome.
We've done it a couple times where it's like, we did it with Liberty Weekly the very first time, and then we did it with Friends Against Government podcast, and it's like, who's hosting? We're not really sure. We're really just having a conversation, and we put it out to our own feeds, and it gives everybody a little bit more to listen to, and the conversations are new and fresh. It's been really fun, so we'd love to do it again with you guys, and I'd recommend doing it. There's plenty of libertarian podcasters out there.
Yeah, and we can always use more. So if
That's
anyone's
right.
listening and wants to get one started,
that's right.
Go for it and reach out to us, and we'll collaborate.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
So I guess we'll go ahead and wrap there. Of course, this will be on Liberty Weekly's news feed. You can see it on Libertarian Union as well. And we'll look forward to hearing you guys next week. All right. Thanks, guys.
Peace.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.